Responding to feedback. I am David Bronkema, and I have the blessing of being with you all tonight to share some thoughts with you. But as usual, let's first start with a word of prayer, shall we? Lord, we give you thanks just for the fun and excitement that you've given us as being part of this PhD family, where we can rejoice with kind of things like what Brittany just shared in terms of progress on her concept paper and her model, and things like what Faith shared, where the Lord made it clear that she was not to assume this position. And Lord, we continue to pray, obviously, for all of those in our PhD family who are continuing to work on their dissertations, and also going through the classes and the courses. And Lord, we ought to lift up to you prayer for all the people who are still suffering the effects from Helene, and of course now with Milton. Pray that your presence will be made felt palpably there. And Lord, I pray for a time of fellowship tonight that you'll give us a lot of fun, that you'll give us some good discussion. And Lord, I pray that what we cover will be useful. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. So jump in at any time. And what we're going to do tonight is, and this is kind of based on what Harry sent out a little, but you probably know me well enough to know that I always like to start off with definitions. So we'll define what seems to be fairly straightforward words as feedback and revisions, and hopefully that we'll get some additional insight as we do that. Then addressing feedback and revisions constructively. The fun thing is we have at least one student here who's been working with me. So Jen can counteract anything that I say, right, Jen? So I'm counting on you if I say anything that perhaps is not right in terms of how I've been doing things, that you'll jump in. I think we
I, I,
have only one. Jim, you're there. I didn't see you come in. Jim can also jump in as well. So very good. So I'm expecting and hoping for that.
Jim, we gotta talk. We gotta talk, Jim.
Jennifer, absolutely. I,
Good.
I logged on just specifically to hold Dr. Bronkema lovingly accountable to all the things that he's going to say. No.
There you go. That is my highest hope. I like that. All right. Developing a thick skin and maintaining perspective and working effectively with your dissertation committee. And then, of course, we'll have time for questions, discussion, and dialogue. So let's jump in. First, in terms of definitions, what is feedback? Well, I know it's probably fairly self-explanatory, but I always like to kind of explore things a little bit. So I just threw this together: comments, suggestions, requests, requirements concerning a piece that you have shared or submitted geared towards improving it. Did I have somebody asking a question? I'm sorry, I can't see. Again, just jump in and mute yourself. So right, it's by a piece. I mean, a document could be a paper, concept paper, a dissertation proposal, but I just kind of put a piece there because you might actually get and seek feedback on something you're publishing even before your dissertation is done. That's not unheard of. I would say that feedback can be addressed to two different aspects of the piece, of whatever the document is. One is in terms of its actual content, and I want to distinguish that from the writing. So let's take and the feedback can be given in different ways. So we'll look at each one of the content and writing, and then the different ways that feedback can be given and is given. So in terms of content, I would say you can break that down into conceptual content, right? So the ideas, the frameworks, and theories that are part of that particular piece, right? That contribute to its framing, that contribute to understanding what the piece is about. And usually we're talking about things that you get from the literature there, right? The literature review and the way that it speaks into what you're doing and frames what you're doing. But also, let's not forget, right? Feedback also on your own concepts, your own ideas, your own insights and theories that are present in the piece. In other words, your contribution to knowledge and to practice. And the second part in terms of, or second possibility in terms of the type of feedback on content is methodological, right? So just feedback on the methods that are proposed and used in the piece, ranging from the theoretical models, right, to the whole research design and all of its various components. All right. I'm sorry, actually, the theoretical model would come under the conceptual, not the methodological. There's a bit of overlap there, but it really would come under the more conceptual. I misspoke there. Feedback on writing. As I was kind of brainstorming this, I think there's several components. The first is the structure of the writing. In other words, how it's organized in terms of its sections, right? Sections can be both formal or informal, right? If it's a a shorter piece, even a concept paper, sometimes you might have sections that are in paragraph form without headers, although it's usually a really good idea to have headers there. And really, the structure is key, right, to create a clear and compelling communication around the topic that the piece addresses. Those of you that have worked with me know I'm big on this one, right? The framing and enumeration of points. I also see that as a bit of the structure, right? And that feedback is generally on whether and to what extent you're introducing your points and enumerating them for clarity, right, in each section, and it can be even in each paragraph. Word choice, voice, grammar. I'm not going to go into these in depth, but again, there can be feedback on those kinds of things. And of course, our beloved APA style, right? So that all comes under feedback on writing. Again, I'm going fast, jumping at any time. Just a few comments on this. You will find it useful to pay attention to that writing rubric contained in our syllabi. For more particulars on these components of feedback, if you want to dig into it more, I won't show it to you now, but maybe when you go back to it and you look at it, you might find yourself looking at it with fresh eyes based on what I just said. And actually, I just kind of discovered this, that writing rubric that's used in our syllabi is the same exact rubric that's used to grade the comprehensive exams. It's just the comprehensive exams have a different nomenclature in the columns. That is the only difference that I was able to spot. All right. So in terms of how feedback is given, I think feedback can be given in 4 different ways, and you might experience any and all of these. First, some of us sometimes might make direct edits to the piece. I used to do that a little bit more, but then what I found is that students weren't really paying attention. It was hard to spot. So any edits that I suggest, I actually just put them in comments right now, with the exception of when I'm trying to show what I'm talking about in terms of my suggestions. So I kind of do some direct edits to say, this is what it would look like, right, if you were to do this particular thing. And also, I tend to, with the people I'm working with, when the draft gets really, really close to being done, that's when I start doing a little bit of direct suggested editing, just like any editor of a book or a journal would do. The second is, so first is direct edits, the type of feedback, the way it's given. Second is written comments in the margins of a Word document. That's what I use. If somebody gives me a Google Doc, I have had students sometimes that prefer to work with Google Docs to track it. I usually download that and give my comments back in Word. And we really don't like PDFs. And I can't think, it's been a while since I've had anybody send me a PDF. But if they do, and I'm thinking more, this is more based in courses, so it's not really as relevant for concept papers or dissertation proposals, definitely not for dissertation. I always change a PDF to Word document to be able to give feedback on it the way that I like to. You also will find some faculty will give you written comments in an email about the piece. So you may find that, especially in early stages, when the feedback or the comments coming back or more overall comments and not nitty-gritty ones in terms of maybe the rating. I've seen some of our faculty members just write an email and say, hey, got this, here's my comments on it. I've seen committee members do that as well, where they actually won't comment or write comments on the document itself. They'll just give you kind of a list of things in an email, or sometimes in a separate Word document. And finally, oral comments during a meeting. You run into this in the pre-proposal meeting, actually in all meetings, pre-proposal and dissertation proposal. And even in the dissertation defense, right, you will get comments. And the dissertation defense, usually there's some small changes to make at least. Sometimes there may be some more substantive changes, although that's a little bit rare. So those are the 4 different types. I've never seen comments given by text. It was the other thing that I was wondering. I don't think that would, yeah, anyway, I won't go there. But I guess I wouldn't be surprised if perhaps in the future sometimes that might happen as well. Okay, so what are revisions? Just quickly, I think, again, pretty straightforward. They're changes that you make to the piece based on the feedback that you've received. So you get feedback, the revisions are actually the changes that you make as a result. I think there are 2 kinds of revisions, right? Some that are suggested, right, where you use your own judgment as to whether what you will revise, you'll do so, right, based on the comments, based on the feedback you get. And then there are required revisions, which is really where you have to, you're required to, you must revise the text and the piece based on the feedback you receive. And I can only think of one concrete example at this point, right, where APA feedback definitely falls in this category, right? If you receive a feedback on APA, that really it falls into the required category. The feedback you're going to receive is usually going to be a combination of all of these, right? Conceptual, methodological, and writing, which means, right, that usually you'll be getting a lot of feedback as you engage in your dissertation process on your concept paper, definitely dissertation proposal and dissertation itself. And it can be quite overwhelming, especially at first until you get used to it. And what I would suggest is it's probably useful to differentiate as you go through that feedback on whatever piece it is, right? To pick out, okay, is this conceptual? Is this methodological? Is this writing? And then create a plan to tackle each one of them. And I think it's really important to remember that, especially on the conceptual and the methodological side, I have run across students who, especially at the beginning, think that they're wasting time, right? They really want to get going and kind of I'm spending all this time mulling over and puzzling over it, and I feel like I'm not making any progress. And usually, after a few back and forth and a few kind of iterations, I think that the realization begins to dawn that actually this is part and parcel of the process. It's not wasted time. It's productive. It's work. It's something that all scholars do. And so, again, thinking about how best to approach it is with the mindset of, yeah, I mean, thinking through things, mulling over them, just like I did today when I was creating this PowerPoint presentation. I thought I could probably dash it off, but it took me a lot longer because I was thinking through and mulling kind of all these different categories that I'd never really thought about before. So hopefully, right, that takes away any kind of anxiety that you're moving too slow. No, I mean, mulling and puzzling over things is really the bread and butter of scholarly work. And I think actually, Jim, I think I got this one from you because I think you mentioned this one to me recently where it was either Jen or Jim. I can't remember. Anyway, one of you two, right? That one of you found take care of the quick things first, right? So that's usually tends to be the writing things. It could be some of the grammatical stuff, and then go on to the more difficult ones, which tend to be more of the sequencing, the framing and enumerating on the writing side. And of course, any of the conceptual things, especially when the feedback is perhaps around a lack of precision about how a word is used and whether that word's the appropriate one. That can take a little while, right, to kind of come up with the right word that embodies whatever concepts you're really trying to get across. All right, so let's then go to, in terms of having done all this around the definitions, in terms of addressing the feedback and revisions in a constructive way. So first, right, it's just important to realize that different faculty give feedback in different ways, right, along the lines that I just outlined. And then second, that doesn't mean, right, that any faculty are any less or more interested. So kind of a difference in style doesn't indicate a different in interest, right? It's just different. I strongly suggest that unless the feedback is specifically stated as required, that you take all feedback as suggestions rather than requirements. I know that I write them pretty much in a style that would indicate that they're requirements, because I'll say do this or do that, but I try to make sure my students know that that's because I'm writing quickly and those are suggestions. And really, for the most part, unless it's specifically stated, these are suggestions. And if there are any of them that you don't like, you definitely feel free to push back on them. One of the things that I struggle with a bit is always trying to make sure, right, that what I'm suggesting is not because I prefer a certain style of writing. This has more to do with writing than anything else. So that tension between a style, something that's stylistic and something that's substantive is something that I try to keep an eye out for, that I try to challenge myself. And I think, especially as I just said before, right, if you think it is more a question of style rather than substance, and you prefer the style that you feel more comfortable with, definitely push back on it. Because in the discussion with your chair and the discussion with your committee members, right, that's when a lot of really neat things come up around this. And ultimately, right, this is your work and your voice. And that's not just on the on the style versus substance. I had one PhD candidate, one student where I literally, and we had gone through several iterations of the dissertation, and on the reflexive portion, it was quite lengthy, and I felt it really took away. So I made the decision just to kind of suggested again cutting all this out, and that did not go over very well. And she pushed back, and the upshot was that she felt that by me suggesting that I was taking away her voice, and it actually ended up in a really good place because she did then cut out significant portions of it, but other portions rather than the ones that I had recommended. And so she was quite happy with that result, and actually ended up publishing a book with most of that in there. So again, just to press that on you all, right? Definitely make sure you push back. We none of us want you to lose your voice in this. Um, Another thing is also make sure that you do address any and all suggestions in the feedback. And if you don't want to accept a suggestion, I think it's important to let us know that and let us know why it leads to these discussions. And again, many times in those discussions, some new and really good things come to light. I also would say yes, does somebody have something? Right. Make sure that you're learning from the feedback in these along these particular lines. As far as conceptually and methodologically, I strongly suggest that if you're talking through these issues, whether it be in person or in Zoom, always make sure that you take notes on it, because you've all had this experience. We've all had this experience, right? Things become articulated in certain ways as you're brainstorming, and that articulation is just ends up being so wonderful. And if you're not taking notes or if you're not recording that conversation, it can be lost, right? The particular way it was said, or even sometimes a particular idea behind it. And I know I've been there, you've been there, where it's kind of frustrating because you had that great thought, you articulated, but then you can't quite recapture that. We all feel that they're part of the conversation. As far as writing is concerned, just an encouragement, right, to really try to learn from the feedback in such a way that you're not repeating mistakes. Now, just by mentioning that word mistakes, obviously that crosses over into the required versus suggested, that there is a better way or right way to do it versus wrong way. And I think we kind of all know what we're talking about here. And one of the things that I've made a suggestion of, and this is kind of through the courses, then on into the dissertation phase, just make a list of the things that you see that you perhaps have been repeated to you in terms of feedback, whatever the patterns are. And then when you're submitting another draft, just maybe just check through it quickly based on that list to make sure that you haven't fallen into what you had done before as far as those mistakes are concerned. So in terms of the developing a thick skin and maintaining a perspective. So as I say here, getting copious and detailed feedback is part of the PhD process. And I will say not only part of the PhD process, but part of the scholarly process as a whole, as we'll see. It's just something that basically is part of your training, and it's part of something you can expect to be involved with and to be subjected to, if we want to use that word. Even though I like to think of it, ooh, great feedback, right? When I get it, even if the feedback might be quite critical in the negative sense. And one of the things to always keep in mind is the only purpose for us giving you feedback is to help you improve both the content of your piece and your writing skills, right? That's the only purpose, right? It's not to embarrass you. It's not to make ourselves appear smarter than you. It's none of that kind of stuff. And so hopefully, right, that's something you can hold on to when you get kind of a ton of feedback and think, okay, well, that's the purpose of it. Let's see what I can take out of this, right? In terms of learning, and obviously, of course, in terms of the improvement. You might get frustrated by feedback that seems to be a bit nitpicky. Usually, and I would say, I mean, it's always the feedback that's given that appears nitpicky. We can go back to that second point, right? The purpose is always to improve. Um, but I think that usually sometimes the feedback that seems to be nitpicky is some of the most important because it helps you to develop an eye and a habit for precision, right? Are you using words in a precise way? Are you expressing yourself in a way that's clear that nothing else can, but what you want to be read into it is being read into it? And so again, that mulling over of specific words, that developing a habit of immediately running through your mind as you're reading something, can this be read a different way? Do these words actually convey precisely what I want them to convey? Is one of the most important skills, scholarly skills, that you're picking up through this dissertation phase. Obviously through the courses, but really in the dissertation phase is where this is heightened. Also, it may be, again, kind of developing a thick skin and maintaining perspective. Uh, and I know this has happened, right? I'll comment on one draft, and then the next draft, things come to my mind that I hadn't seen in the first. And I haven't had anybody really say this to me, but I can imagine and I would expect, right, that there's some frustration there by the students. Well, why didn't you make that? Why didn't you make that observation in the first draft? Why wait till the second one? I have to do, this additional work. And uh, part of what, as I mulled over this, I think it's just a matter of when things start to be sequenced better, to be written better, then I and other faculty members actually we can pay more attention to, or it's a little bit clearer in terms of the content, and new things come to mind. But also, I think part of it is just you just don't see it the first time you read it. You see it the second time you read it. It's just kind of like, reading a Bible verse. Why don't you think of all the different meanings of the Bible verse? Why is it that some years, you read the same Bible verse and you get a whole new meaning to it? It's just part of the way I think that our mind works, and part of the way I think that the spirit works. And so what I would say is when you get these new suggestions and there might be a temptation to be frustrated, well, why didn't they see that in the first place? Just think, well, that's actually probably a good sign of progress. I'm making progress, and right, it's another area of improvement that you can tick off. Sometimes, right, you might feel that the feedback you're getting is inconsistent from draft to draft. So in one draft, right, your faculty gives you feedback and says, kind of suggests this, you do it, and then the next draft, the faculty member kind of reverses and says, do this, which would take it back to the other one. Usually I catch that, and what I'll say to the student is, you know what, I actually liked it better, what you had before. I don't think the suggestion I gave you worked out as well. And again, what I would say is if you feel the feedback is inconsistent, and just use your own judgment of what you think the best resolution is, and make sure you point it out to the faculty member. I mean, I do enjoy it, as Jim was saying, to be well, I don't think he was saying this necessarily, but I do enjoy being held accountable, quote unquote, in that sense, because I know, as I think my next point is, at times my feedback is off, right? I may miss a point, I may not see something. And so this all goes again back to, right, if you have any doubt or if you have a different point of view, definitely make sure that you engage us in the discussion around it, right? It's going to help you learn, help you develop a thick skin in terms of realizing, yeah, I get, the feedback is there to improve. Sometimes the feedback might not be helpful, and that's just kind of part of what happens. And just a final point along these lines, right? We've all been through this, all of us who are in teaching positions at this point, and we all continue to go through it as scholars. So I wanted to share just at least two brief stories. One is, so I was asked to write this chapter on Christianity and social action. This was a couple years ago, and so I wrote the chapter, finally finished it, just beginning of this year. And when I went to send it in, I said to Rob, my wife, I said, I don't think they're going to like this. I had a great time with it. It was totally theoretical. They hadn't given me any guidance whatsoever what they were looking for. And this was a volume actually that come out next month by Routledge on Christianity and culture. And so sure enough, I got a letter saying, we read your piece and unfortunately we're unable to accept it for publication. So, I already kind of had an inkling. So I wrote, and actually when they wrote me that, they said, we were really looking for a piece that had this, 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 and this. And I'm thinking, why didn't you tell me that in the first place? So I wrote back and I said, sorry to hear that. Happy to write that chapter along those lines. And they were thrilled because they thought they were going to have a kind of a keep chapter missing from the volume. So I wrote that up. But the upshot was, well, first of all, again, right, thick skin. They didn't like it. I kind of had an inkling they might not have. I used that first chapter. I've used it 2 or 3 times for presentations, and it's been extremely useful in ththose contexts. And now this new chapter, right, will be coming out, the revised chapter coming out, and I've used that one as well. Second one, which it's kind of funny. So I am co-editor of our Christian Relief Development and Advocacy Journal, and we have 3 co-editors. So the kind of the main editor, really, Roland Hawksberg, and he's a retired economist from Calvin College. I've known him for probably about 30 years at this point, so we're really good friends. And we've been co-editing, just the 2 of us, for the last 3 years. We just added a third co-editor. So I actually submitted an article that I co-wrote to the journal for him to read and tell me what he thought. So he gives me a call. And I could tell, like, he was just beating around the bush. He wanted to say it. He had not been able to sleep, right? Basically, what he's telling me is he didn't think it was well written at all, and he was really surprised at the poor quality, given that he thought I was a good writer. Now, he and I actually think it was more of a style difference because he has a very different style. But again, we all go through this, right? We all go through it where somebody would tell you, I don't think that's written well, or that doesn't really conceptually fit with what we were looking for. So my suggestion is, right, when you're going through this, to develop a thick skin, just think of your chair and your dissertation committee as your publishing editors, right, that are going to give you critical feedback, that hopefully we do it in a way that is generous and that is kind. Sometimes we're writing quickly, so we don't sugarcoat things perhaps as much as we should, but the more you're involved in this, it's never going to end. The more practice you get in terms of just not taking it quote unquote personally, it's not embarrassing. It's just part of being the part of the trade of a scholar. All right. Let me just finish up so that we have at least close to half an hour for comments, questions, discussion. So working effectively with your dissertation committee. So I would say before even the dissertation committee is formed, and you all may already be way beyond this, but what I'm really encouraging, actually no, because we have cohort 16 is here as well. So you all know this already. What I've been encouraging, right, is seeking feedback before your chair is assigned or a committee formed. And so really what I want to encourage, and I know what we all want to encourage, is, we want you to be accelerating towards your dissertation process, right? To be graduating as quickly as possible. And that means, right, getting things going with your concept paper, with your literature review, even your chapter 2, right? Even before you have a dissertation. So that by the time you're done with comps, you can hit the ground running in terms of this dissertation process. In terms of the process and the progression of feedback with the chair and the committee, so your chair will be the one that works with you most closely in terms of creating a polished draft of all the pieces, right? Of the concept paper, the dissertation proposal, and the dissertation itself. And then the committee members will come in only when that's done. Now that's the usual way, but there are exceptions, right? Especially if you have a methodologist who's not your committee chair. Usually then you'll be working with your methodologist on especially the methods portion of your concept paper, and on the chapter 3 of your dissertation proposal, probably primarily first times. The chair would like to see kind of a draft in terms of giving you comments back on the writing and not necessarily on the methodology, but that's an exception. And also, there may be some situations where you have a committee member who's a content expert, or perhaps who you're close to, who you trust, who you like to run things by in addition to your chair. Definitely, you should feel free to do so. Just let your chair know, right, that you're doing that. Basically what we as chairs want to make sure of is that you're not getting conflicting opinions from committee members and chair. And so we try to shepherd that process so that that doesn't occur. In terms of the concept paper, I'm going to go through kind of each step as far as working effectively with the committee. You tend to work on that as a whole and get feedback on it as a whole from your chair and or your methodologist. But sometimes you might be working on sections of it, right? So you might be working on kind of the literature mapping section or the research design section. So there may be times where you might just want to run those pieces by instead of the concept paper as a whole by your chair. And you can definitely ask your chair to work that way with you as well. As far as a dissertation proposal, usually for qualitative dissertations, you'll usually work on your chapter 2 first for the proposal, because that tends to be the one that is most lengthy, that takes the most amount of work. But generally, the methodology chapter takes a little bit less work. And it's also something that usually for qualitative, right, it's not as involved as far as the sampling and the research design is concerned. What is a little bit more involved is the theoretical foundation for whatever qualitative method you choose. And chapter 1 tends to always be last, because that basically is your concept paper primarily, but you really need to have those other 2 chapters done so that your chapter 1, which summarizes both your literature review and your research design, can be written in such a way that it's consistent with those 2. For quantitative, it's not unusual for in the dissertation proposal for chapter 3 to be the first one worked on. I think it's still most of the case, even for quantitative, that chapter 2 tends to be the first one that's worked on, because it's kind of hard to get to the dissertation proposal phase without a good theoretical model having been established in your concept paper. And once you have that established, then kind of in a sense, kind of the research design, the sampling and all that is fairly straightforward. So usually your chapter 2, again, in quantitative, is still the first one worked on, because you have to kind of come up with all the literature around the various variables that you're using in that. And so the lesson from all of this, right, is really whatever seems best to you and your chair, and you want to discuss it and discuss it intentionally in terms of how to go about that, right? That should be kind of the path that you adopt in all of this. So in terms of so usually as far as the process is concerned, you usually seek feedback on each chapter and section. And I don't know why I had that one there. I think that's it. I don't know why that one was out there. Huh. I think that was probably just left over and a blooper. All right, so that is the presentation. Let me stop sharing. I did stop sharing, right? Stop share. Stop share. There you go. All right. So I went through that really quickly. Now it's time of comments, questions, and discussion. So jump in.
So of course I have a question.
Yes, Jen.
So I haven't shared, I mean, as you know, I just submitted, draft of my proposal, and I haven't shared any of the proposal with my committee, my other 2 members. Should I have done that before I sent you? Not yet?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I probably didn't kind of stress that enough. Usually, really, you want to create a polished draft with your chair before you share with any
Okay.
members, unless you have a committee member, again, that you really trust and you
Right.
think can kind of give you insight on something that you're working with. And why is that? You want that because you want, well, as a chair, for example, I want that because, at least in my experience, because I really demand and make sure that that is a polished draft, right? So when it goes to the committee members, they don't have to worry about the writing. It's clear, right? They can
Right.
focus in on the content. And I've never, I mean, praise the Lord, never had really any committee come back and say no. Either a proposal or a dissertation needs to be substantively revised, right? And so that's really, as chairs, what we want, right? We wanted to go to the committee. We want the committee to say, wow, this
Right.
is really good. We have a few things here and there. Sometimes there might be a stream of literature, right, that hasn't been identified because you have the content experts. So all that to say, Jen, no, I mean, there may be some
Okay.
exceptions, but usually we don't like committee members unless they really want to be involved. And of course, unless there's a methodologist involved to see anything until it's in tip-top shape.
Okay, great.
Yeah, good question.
Dr. Bronkema,
Yes, Deal.
yeah, what is expected word count or pages for chapter 2, 3, and 1?
Yeah, so there is none, but let's say chapter 1 is the easiest to answer that. That one usually will be kind of again where your concept note is, maybe about 12 pages, certainly no more usually than 15. I don't think I've ever seen anyone even kind of approach 20, but there might be some 20 pages out there. Why? Because that's basically your statement of the problem, right? You'll have, usually I encourage people to kind of bring the reader into their lives about why they're doing this dissertation. So what we call a reflexivity portion, right? So give a little bit of story about themselves, what drew them to this topic, right? That really, we all are interested in that. But then it really is a statement of the problem, right? Your purpose statement, then your research questions, right? Then is your significance section, a little bit of a summary of literature review, a summary of research design, and then your limitations, right? I mean, that's what it is. So again, 15 pages, you make it short to the point, succinct, and of course you're pointing to in your summary of literature review in chapter 2, you're going to expand that more fully. You're pointing in your research design summary to chapter 3, where you're going to expand it more fully. Now, chapter 2, there are some situations where chapter 2 might actually be 2 or 3 chapters because there's so much literature out there and somebody wants to summarize, kind of just summarize it so comprehensively. I had somebody, I think, once do at least two chapters for the chapter 2. I know there were discussions about a third. I don't think they ended up doing that. So in that case, right, a chapter 2 might be 100 to 150 pages, right? A chapter 2 for some dissertations might be 50 pages, right? It really depends on the amount of literature that you need to cover to really frame your dissertation well and to show that you have expertise, especially in the specific subject that you're tackling. Think about it this way. When you finish your dissertation, you should be the foremost world expert in the topic that you're tackling. I mean, that's what a dissertation is, right? You are advancing knowledge, which means you are doing something that nobody else has done, which means you are the foremost authority on that very specific subject that you're tackling. That doesn't mean you're the foremost authority on all the streams of literature that you have to cover for that topic. But yes, for the literature on the very specific topic that you're covering, you know it better than anybody else in the world, right? So, but some topics require framing by what we would call more adjacent literature than others, right? So it may be a topic that's really a niche topic in a broader topic. So your chapter 2 will be longer. But if you're covering a topic that's not been covered before, there's not much literature to cover specifically on your topic. So it's all adjacent literature. So it might be a lot shorter. Usually quantitative dissertation chapter 2s tend to be shorter because those are focusing in on the variables, right? On the variables and how they have been used and how they have been examined. But that's not always the case, right? Because there can be a lot of literature on, say, the variable of trust, right? I mean, that's going to fill up quite a few pages. But even so, usually the quantitative literature is very specific, is very focused. So even on the variable of trust, right? Instead of maybe if you're looking at trust from a qualitative perspective, I mean, you're going to have at least 20 to 30 pages on just that topic alone from a qualitative perspective. Quantitative perspective, there are only so many different ways that you can measure trust, right? And only so many studies, right, that have necessarily done that. And trust comes to mind because that's how it is. CASA's one. And Jake actually had some aspects of the trust literature in the dissertation that I'm sharing right now. And so yeah, but actually Jake is a good example, right? I mean, his is a quantitative dissertation, but it's on servant leadership. And Jake is, I would say, I actually said this is probably the foremost world authority on servant leadership at this point because he knows that literature inside and out. There's nothing about servant leadership literature that he doesn't know, right? And so his his chapter 2, I think, was like 70 pages or something like that, right? Because of the servant leadership. But that, again, for quantitative dissertations tends to be a little bit unusual for it to be that long. Chapter 3, Teal, though that tends to be a little bit shorter, probably again 15 to 20 pages or so. For some, especially qualitative, it might be more because, say, you're going into phenomenology, especially grounded theory, not as much. Phenomenology tends to be a little bit longer in terms of the theoretical backing for that. Part of it depends on how deeply people want to get into the theory of the methodology itself. Some people enjoy that more than others. Others just kind of want to get the bare basics down and then, go off and do their work. Teal, was that helpful? Did I answer your question? Okay, good. Fun talking about this stuff. All right, other questions or comments?
Teal, I just put in the chat that I looked at previous dissertations by different chairs, different types of studies, qualitative versus quant, and I found that really helpful just for style and I don't know, different advisors and what they were looking for. So I don't know if you would find that helpful, but I spent a whole day like just scouring all the EU dissertations.
Jen, you got to publish on that, at least internally. Any patterns that you found? I'm curious now.
I did. I actually did find some. I wrote about 3 pages of notes on patterns, but I don't know if I don't know if I want that recorded.
All right, you have me intrigued now. It would be fun to have that for a reflective session in one of our faculty meetings. Jen did this and noticed these patterns. What do we think about that? So that'd be great. Jim, you had something?
Yeah, no, I was just going to ask Jen. I looked at all of Dr. Bronkema, the dissertation you shared on, and I could find no patterns. Like I think I might be just like a little thicker, and then I could find no, or if I did find a pattern, it changed whenever I was writing my chapters, and so, but it could also be because I had to learn kind of a new style of writing within my dissertation.
100%.
Yeah,
I'm curious, Jen. I'm curious. I mean, you feel free to record anything about me. Did you find any patterns in the dissertations that I supervised?
A little bit, as far just a tinge of what you were saying about the phenomenology piece, because that's what I was really looking at, because I'm phenomenology. So I was really paying attention to that style and kind of, I don't know, I actually did I found some useful citations and references in some others. So I was able to kind of do a little bit of a dive and say, oh, that's a interesting citation or reference. So I used it as that, like where I was able to kind of use some references. But I think there was a pretty consistent amount for like chapter 1 and things like that for the qual study. So that's really what I was looking for.
Yeah.
I was afraid I didn't have enough, but I think I had enough. I just needed to add a little more.
Yeah. You know what, Jen, you remind me also, and I should have thought about putting there. I've never actually done this. Well, actually, I probably have, but I can't recommend enough to you what Jen just said, especially for your chapter 3. Take a look at the other dissertations, right?
It was completely Jake's idea, so I can't take credit for it because that's what he told me to do.
Yeah, no, and I've actually never suggested this to people because I'm a little bit leery. I might have suggested to one person, but take a look at the other dissertations that have used the methodology that you're employing, and what Jen said, you'll strike gold there, right? You don't want to plagiarize, but there's only so much that you can say about methodological theory, right? And what Jen said, if somebody's done a really, really good job of it, you can just look up the same sources they did, right? And kind of use that way. So
that's exactly what I did.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks for mentioning that. Jim, it's interesting that you comment on that because I think it goes back possibly to my really trying to make sure that I distinguish between style and substance, because there are times where I've really been tempted to make suggestions about certain things, and I say, no, that's a style thing. That's hard for me to do, and I think it's hard for some of us to do, but I think it's really important. So yeah.
I will say that it took me a while to figure out what was, and I wish I could maybe turn back the clock a little bit before I was writing chapter 1, 2, and 3 and attended this webinar then. So all of you that are doing that now, like good on you. Because for a while I couldn't understand like what was a style, like a stylistic suggestion, or what was just a question that I should ponder, or what was a change that I should make. And I learned probably around my like fourth or fifth maybe editorial draft of chapter 2 where I was like, oh, I could ask questions back to my chair. Like, what do you mean by this? Or yeah, this is why you didn't do that. And I know with and so then it kind of clicked on me that it was really a collaborative exercise. And I kept looking at it like it was an assignment, right? And it is, but I was like, oh, I have to write this paper and I'm going to send it in, and then I'm going to get a grade with a feedback on that there's nothing I can do with. And it really isn't. It's more like I send this in and then people ask me kind of questions. They're like, how are you thinking about this? And I would write something about the question. And it really wasn't about that. It was really more like all I need to do was like look at these two lines and really think about that and how it reflects to the other. And once I got that down, it really kind of clicked. And I'm a little dense because I wasn't trained like that as a writer. Originally, I wrote for a newspaper, so everything was really quick and the quotes were really established. And it was, there was a method to it that was different. And so but then once I realized I could ask questions and the document was kind of living, it made it two things. It made it far more accessible, and two, it was more fun then, if that makes sense. Is that fair, Dr. Bronkema?
No, I think that's fair. And you give me an idea of really trying to then, with future people I work with, to kind of try to say exactly what you just said, right? And see if that makes a difference in terms of the way that they're taking the feedback. So I really appreciate that. That's good. Mm-hmm.
No, yeah, that was because at one part you were like, "Hey, what happened to this?" And I was like, "Oh, I should put that back in there." And then I put it, and it didn't work. And then I was like, "Well, I took it out for a reason. What was the reason? Why I should explain that?" And you're like, "Oh, that makes sense. Like, you don't need to do that." It's like, "Oh, I should have just answered that in the front
I
end."
I also feel like I needed to read like I think you made a good point, Dr. Bronkman. There were a lot of things you can change really quickly, but then there were other things that I saved for later that it took me and to your point, Jim, I feel a little dense because I had to go through and read the comment maybe four, five, six times to really understand like, okay, what is he trying to get at? What am I not? So I had to really work at that part and think about, I don't know. And I just took a stab at it and just, tried to just, and then I sent an email back to Dr. Bronkman and said, look, I on page 15, I don't know. I gave it another shot, but have fun with it. So I don't know. So that's, I think, part of the iterative process.
Well, this is really good feedback because one of the things that I didn't stress in the presentation, and actually I do have students that do this fairly regularly, is they want to talk over certain comments, right? So say, hey, can we get together? And Jen, I think we've done that from time to time. So one of the things that I also tend to stress, although perhaps not enough, is hey, if you're wrestling with either a comment or even wrestling with a particular section, just give me a call. Like, let's jump on to Zoom and kind of talk through it, right? And I love what you said, Jim, that somebody echoed in the comment. It is a collaborative process. And that's actually the way it happens when you're writing a book, right? When you have an editor who's working with you, this is exactly what they do, right? They give you a suggestion, or they say, well, what about this? Or they say, are you sure you mean this? Or maybe, so it's, again, like I say, it's not just a dissertation, but it's scholarly through and through. So very helpful, Jen. Very helpful, Jim. Yep. Katie, you had your hand up. I don't know if that was saying bye to Teal or if it was, yep.
Yeah, obviously I'm, on the very front end of this process being cohort 16, but um, I, I grabbed onto something you said related to um, the chair and bringing other people in before the document is fully like in as a final of a rough draft as it possibly can be. Even if we're consulting people that are outside of the committee in that early stage, is it good practice to like disclose that to the chair, or is that not a big deal? I want to get a sense of what I get a sense that there's some hesitance to have a whole lot of different influences at that stage.
No, I think the concern is, well, so let me say is no, I think you should consult with it, whoever you feel you want to consult with that you think will kind of help you see things beyond your chair. The only caution I would say is when it comes to committee members, and you're doing that with committee members, because you don't want kind of, in a sense, committee members, first of all, being at odds with each other. And I've heard horror stories and other, not at Eastern, but in other PhD processes where committee members are just at loggerheads, and it makes it really tough for the person to get done. So that was my only caution. So I think no. And I know I've had students who have had people that they've run drafts by, and it wasn't, they didn't consult with me, right? They just said, oh yeah, I checked it with my friend who's an expert on this, or, I asked them to take a look at it. And the only thing that comes to mind is I know there's some language in our dissertation handbook around kind of, I think kind of writing, right? Kind of getting writing help. But there's nothing in terms of kind of running concepts, ideas, or drafts by people outside the committee. That's absolutely fine. Yeah. And actually, if you can find faculty members, and there's some of us out there, right? We just love to kind of read over stuff and give comments back. People who and who enjoy doing that. That's worth your weight in gold, right? Because it's a whole other kind of set of eyes and perspectives and ideas and insights, right? That may may bring to the fore something new that your chair and committee have perhaps not thought of.
Yeah, I didn't want to trip over something I didn't know was a best practice or something. So
no, it's fine. That's one of the reasons, right? In the old days, what we would all do, right, as we were writing our dissertation, is we would just present chapters at conferences, right? And so you get feedback. You present it, you get feedback on it. And man, it was just such a great process because you got so many people speaking into it. That's kind of, with ILA, maybe we do that a little bit, but I've never seen anybody really presenting any of their chapters, or even kind of, it's usually a different study they're doing from their dissertation. So I'm not quite sure when that change happened and why. So, good question, Katie. Yeah.
Thanks.
Other thoughts or comments? Mala, what time is it for you there? Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
Getting close to 2 a.m.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
You are a rock star, Mala, man. Dr. I was just going to chime in to just kind of reinforce everything that you've been talking about tonight, because as I'm, in my dissertation phase, I've had a pretty rocky start from May to now. And, so I thought I had everything all set to go in May, and then realized that one of my variables was not going to work. And so I started with another new variable, new research, all of the things, submitted a concept paper to my chair in July, and got a lot of feedback that I really had to dice through. And I had a lot of questions around it, and I had a lot of frustration around it, and just go through the process, give it the time that it needs, consult with the people that you need to, and I promise you'll get to like this moment of clarity. And that was me today. So October 10th, I got some clarity. And my chair is Dr. Chang, who is a qualitative methodologist, and I have a quant study. So I felt no shame in reaching out to my quant guy today to just confirm things. And again, like, you need those moments of clarity. You need those like woohoo moments to just get you through. And so everything that you've talked about tonight is just like, I've lived it the last 4 or 5 months. So thank you.
Thanks, Brittany. Appreciate that comment and encouragement, and not just encouragement, but basically exhortation, right, to those of you who are kind of entering into this phase now. So thank you, Brittany.
And we have bounced a lot off of each other as a cohort. So I think, I don't know if that's unusual, but I feel like cohort 15 especially we're constantly chatting, and we were just always bouncing stuff off of each other.
Well, one of the funnest, and by the way, funnest is a word in the dictionary, just in case you didn't know. I'm serious. It has been added. So one of the funnest things actually
I'm going to
is,
find a spot for that in my dissertation.
I'm not sure it's academically acceptable, but it is part of the English language. I mean, formal English language. But one of the things I enjoy the most is, and sometimes this has happened in past residencies where we'll get together with somebody to brainstorm their topic along with 2 or 3 other, right, of their cohort or others. And it's just great, right? Because there's so many ideas coming in, right? And everybody's asking questions and offering opinions and all that. So I echo what Jen just said, right? I mean, you can never brainstorm enough, right? I mean, it really is. Even once you have clarity, there are still going to be things that you want to think through. Think through it as a community, right? I mean, in one of my, I think it's actually in my dissertation, I love reading those introductions, right, to books and to dissertations, right? And actually, I say that in the introduction to my dissertation, because I really do think it is a community endeavor, right? And you see, everybody they're thanking, and usually either in dissertations or in books, it's a long list of people, right? And so I do think that scholarship, even though for all of its kind of individualistic and kind of quote unquote lonely, although I've never felt lonely doing scholarship, but individualistic elements, is still a community endeavor because you're building on the knowledge of everybody else who you've been reading, and right, if you can get conversation partners, even more so. All right, we have 3 minutes left. Anything else? How many of you are watching the WNBA finals, first game tonight? Yeah, Katie. You cheering for anybody? No? All right.
I'm still mourning over the Phillies, I have to say. Sorry.
Oh
I'm
my
still jilted.
goodness. How about that? Yeah.
I'm mourning over my Brewers too. We got my same
I'm
team,
with
Jen.
you. I love them.
Yeah,
Darn
that's
Mets.
Was it Jon Stewart of The Daily Show? Apparently he's a real Mets fan. He's so excited. Yeah. All right. Anything else before we close?
Thank you again, Dr. Bronkema.
You're welcome. Who's going to close us in prayer?
Thank you. You're the best.
Thank you, Jen. Who will close us in prayer?
I will. I'm feeling good today.
Thanks, Brittany.